sometimes the thing that we're most afraid of is what we want. So we want success, but it turns out that we might actually be very afraid of being successful. Is that the case where I assume courage plays a role?
That takes courage because it's messy. Like these things take courage, but if they're coming from a place of truth, it's a lot easier to keep walking the walk and keep down that path. But the problem I find is that we don't know, or clients who come to me initially don't know, is this truth? Is this a should? And so when you're able to touch truth and really go in there and kind of, I always think about it as like unweaving, unbraiding the beliefs and the emotions and the conditioning and the passed down crap that's muddied the waters. And then you get to that like pure thread in the middle that is you. It's so much easier to live courageously. It doesn't feel necessarily even courageous anymore. It just feels like you.
Welcome to Side Note, the podcast, where we get real about what it takes to actually build something meaningful. I'm sitting down with power players and thought leaders to explore what makes us tick. From deep psychology to cosmic insight, from entrepreneurial wisdom to intuitive, divine feeling breakthroughs. Because success is about way more than what's in the business books. So join me for conversations that'll change the way you think about business, life, and everything in between. Welcome. Today's episode with our guest, Kelley, was fantastic. Kelley Hoag is a somatic behavioral therapist, and we chat so many juicy topics in this show today. We cover what does wisdom really mean. We talk about what does even somatic mean and the connection between the mind and the body, how to find our truth, with a capital T. How do we distinguish what's ours versus what other people's that we're carrying? Are we carrying other people's goals or are they ours? We also talk a lot about values and what does it mean to live a values-driven life? How do you discover your values? Again, which values are yours, which are not? And there are so many similarities that Kelley and I found between each other. I come from the business angle, obviously, as a business coach, and the whole foundation of my work is that, yes, there are strategies and it's important to look at numbers and how business works and all that good stuff. And intuition is just as important because every single business owner is different. And intuition is one of the most powerful ways to figure out how you should run your business. How can you run your business? What does it look like for you? What does your experience as a business owner look like? How do you balance that with just being a human, a woman, and all the other identities that you might carry? So talking with Kelley today, we really break down that intuitive piece. What even is intuition? How do we distinguish that from something like anxiety? So we cover so much in today's episode. So I'm so excited. It is such a treat. And I loved having her on. So enjoy. Kelley, thank you so much for joining the show today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I am so excited to chat. Kelley's work spans a lot of different areas. And I think women, especially women business owners, we're coming up against so many different things, whether it's boundaries, whether it's we're trying to figure out why we have a certain pattern or act a certain way. And I think your work really spans that. But before we dive into the heart of this episode, could you give our listeners a quick intro of who you are and what you do?
Sure. Yeah. I'm Kelley Hoag, a somatic behavioral therapist. People are like, what's that? And often they ask that because they haven't heard of it because it's something that I made up. It's a title and also a modality, somatic behavioral embodiment, that I fused together, bridging a couple of different techniques and practices and belief systems that I like to call intuition-led and research-backed. And so bringing my background in psychology and behavior alongside my passion for somatic work is really how this all came about. And so I work with clients traditionally one-on-one to help them bridge the gap between their mind and their body. Somatic work, soma means body. So it's a little bit different than traditional talk therapy because we use the sensations in your body. We use breath, we use movement to get into the good stuff, into the nitty gritty, what's deeper, what's beneath the surface.
Yeah. And I imagine that that's really powerful because we love to be in our heads and can get stuck intellectualizing things. I know myself, I can intellectualize something all day.
Same.
But if I check in with my body, I find that there's greater truth there.
Yeah, absolutely. Most of the clients that I work with have been in therapy before. They're like, I know what happened to me when I was 5. I know my attachment style. I've been in therapy. And now what? I feel like there's more that I can't touch. And I was the same way. That's how I got into somatic work myself.
Yeah, absolutely. I've actually been doing similar work with my therapist the last few years because I've been in therapy for about 13 years now. But it wasn't until the last few years doing somatic work that I really was able to see and kind of tackle the root things of certain patterns I was seeing. Now, when you say somatic work, what does that look like with you?
Yeah, with me specifically, it is an umbrella term. And so I niched it down with that method, my method of somatic behavioral embodiment. So it's one thing to go beneath the surface and have a somatic experience, which typically the beginning of a session with me looks like traditional talk therapy. We'll come in, what's up? How's the last week been? What's going on? How you feeling? And then I'll start to notice, okay, where is that manifesting in your body? The anxiety that you're feeling, or the trepidation, or the fear, where do you notice it in your body? What sensations are there? And we use your body as kind of a portal into these beliefs, where they came from. Great. That's half the story. That's usually where therapy kind of stops. The second part, the behavioral piece, is, well, what do I do with it now? What do I do? How do I keep allowing these beliefs that we've touched, this new way of talking to myself, this new part that I've just touched, to be kind of brought into the conversation? How do I do that? And so that's the behavioral piece, is what are we going to do? Let's talk about it together and gain some clarity. And then 9 times out of 10, I'm going to give you something to do in between sessions too, to really have it be a behavioral shift. It's nice to talk about it and feel it, but what are we going to do next?
Yeah. I'm curious the science behind that, because I think there are lots of experiences that we have. We learn something from it. The integration afterwards seems to be just as important. And like you were saying, you basically say, hey, try this exercise or this thing in between. What's going on there?
Well, a big part of it is repetition. And so if we're meeting once a week, once every other week, one-on-one, majority of the time I'm not with you. So I want to make sure that the beliefs that you're wanting to have, the beliefs that are going to help you live the life of pleasure and passion and purpose, are the beliefs that you are repeating in your mind and in your body. And so repetition is a huge part of it. And it's funny because when we were talking before about like the many iterations of Root to Rise, my business. And it started out with a big focus on habits because my master's is in behavior. And so I was helping people create healthier habits. And then I realized, okay, but my habits kind of stink. Like, there's more to the story here. Obviously, I have a bachelor's in psychology. I'm a health coach. I've got a master's in behavior, and I still don't feel like turned on by myself, by my life. And so I realized, well, there's something beneath the surface. And that's how somatic work came into my life. And so now it feels like this amazing bridge between the two, between the external, the behaviors, all the research behind that, all the different ways to change behavior change, and then what's happening beneath the surface, which is still science-based. I have my bachelor's of science in psychology, but I like to say it's intuition-led, because there's a lot of trusting yourself. There's a lot of opening that dialogue between your mind and your body. There's a lot of noticing the sensations in your body and being able to become more fluent in your body's language. And sometimes we've got to sprinkle in a little magic into the science. So I think about it as a beautiful harmony of both.
Yeah, I love that. What was one habit that you had that you changed as a result of this work?
How much time do you have? Okay. Well, when I first started this, I thought I had to have all the habits, like a full-blown 2-hour morning routine. Let me meditate and have hot water with lemon and journal. I've got to journal. I've got to do it all. And then I thought, well, I didn't I felt this is depleting me more than it's nourishing me. So fast forward 10 years, most days I wake up at 9:30 and I drink some water and then I keep it moving and start my day. And every day it looks a little bit different, but it was so untrue to me to start my day so rigid with no regard for what my body was really wanting, no check-in about what are my desires today, no connection to like it's winter versus it's summer. And so the biggest habit that changed for me was checking in the morning and asking myself, okay, hi body, what do you want? What would feel so good?
If you are anything like me, you have probably found yourself staring at your business's marketing copy until it feels like your eyes want to bleed. And maybe you're thinking, is this too corporate? Or does this sound like my neighbor's sketchy essential oil business? It's really tricky finding that sweet spot. After 13 years, I have noticed mistake after mistake when it comes to people's marketing, and messaging is a big one. But there are 9 others that I identified over this time, and I put all of those into a sweet little guide for you called Common Mistakes Entrepreneurs Make in Marketing and How to Fix Them. You can think of this as your what not to wear guide for business, with a lot of helpful pointers for which direction to move in when you stumble upon these roadblocks. So you can get that in the show notes. With that, let's get back to the episode. That's such a fascinating example because it's the exact opposite of what you would expect. You think building a habit, okay, I need a routine to keep me posted, but you did the opposite. You removed it. And I think it's important to talk about too, because routines can be rigid. And as women, we have cycles and nature has cycles. And so we have to be flexible with that. And some people routines work great, but I'm in a similar spot with that.
Yeah. I mean, if I wanted every day to look exactly the same, I would go and have like a corporate job, but it feels a lot better for me personally to have variety. And this is another topic that I could talk about for days, is values. And so for me, enjoyment of life is my top number one value. For other people, their top value could be stability.
Yeah.
That person probably thrives off a routine more so than I do. So my way is aligned with my values. And I think having that connection, this is something I do with all of my clients, is getting familiar with their values, their top 10 values. So you can see, oh, well, of course, this rigid morning routine doesn't feel good. It's not aligned with my values at all. And so having that kind of North Star to check in with your values, it starts to make sense what feels good, why it feels good, and what to do about it.
Mm-hmm. A guiding light for sure. Mm-hmm. What's one question you would ask clients to help them discover their values?
Well, the way I take them through it, it's less about one question and more about the process. I always say getting to your top 10 values is equally as important as having your top 10 values. So I really like it to be a slower, more intentional process where you're working out the nuance of each value, what actually feels aligned for me, which is versus what's been conditioned, what's a value that was passed down to me, what do I think should be a value, versus what actually is a value. So it's not one question. It's like the beauty in the process.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking like, what are my values? Like what drives my decisions? And it's hard. It's more difficult than it sounds because I'm thinking of so many different things and different things that are important to me. And money, I read this recently, but it's like money is a tool to maybe get stability, but stability is the overall value.
Yes. I got into values work because I thought that wealth was a high value for me, not necessarily a driving value, but something that took up a lot of space in my mind. I was comparing a lot when it came to wealth. My mom is also an entrepreneur. Wow. Wealth is one of her values. And it felt passed down. And I could sense that something was out of alignment with that, felt kind of sticky, icky. And so when I did my own deep dive of my values, wealth was not on there at all. Not in my top 10. I don't think it was even in my top 15. And it was so liberating for me to see that because I immediately stopped comparing myself when it came to wealth. I realized, oh, this is my mom's, this is society's, this isn't really mine. And so if my top value, certainly above wealth, is to enjoy my life, my day is going to look a lot differently than it would if a top value of mine was wealth. Those are two very different driving factors. And so, yeah, it was really liberating for me and allowed me to have a much more authentic business model.
Yeah, absolutely. I expect too that people have different definitions of different values. Like
Mm-hmm.
wealth could be money to one person, but wealth could be like an abundance of
Mm-hmm.
something else to another. Or it could be time wealth, which is one of
Yeah.
mine. I like a lot of time and I like feeling like I have a lot of time. There's a lot of freedom in that for me. I
Yeah.
like scheduling freedom. So I think that's a big, huge driver of me and how I structure my business too. So I'm starting to connect the dots now between the values and then how you design your life to support those.
Yeah, and also the balance too between structure and intuition, because values is such a nice parameter to have so that you can kind of play within it and have a little bit more intuitive flow. So that's one of the biggest things. And it's funny, I always have felt kind of pulled in two directions. I'm from New York originally. I lived in LA for a long time. I felt very like hustle, masculine. I'm very Capricorn. But I also had the LA in me, like the surfing and the hanging out all day and a life of leisure. And so I've always felt very, pretty balanced by the two. And I think there's a lot of noise, as I'm sure you know and speak to, when it comes to running your own business, where it's like, this is the formula, this is the structure, this is the email sequence. And it's like,
Don't
whoa.
get me started. Do not get
Yeah.
me started.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, how do we have both? Because I think structure is important. I know it's important, but the structure, the right structure, the unique, authentic structure to you that allows you to still have your own expression, your own authenticity, be aligned with your values so that you can play within them. And I also teach yoga, and this is something that I love to bring into yoga classes too. How do we have the balance of the structure of a pose, but then also the freedom to listen to your body and kind of make it your own? And I think doing that, this is the beauty of somatic work as well. There's a big movement piece of somatic work. And so whether it's a yoga class or a one-on-one session, how do you have the felt sense in your body of what it's like to have structure, of like feeling into your spine, feeling that support
Mhm.
system, then also feeling your heart and the tenderness of the front part of your body and letting your spine support your heart, feeling what that's like. And so that's this beautiful, when I say somatic behavioral embodiment, this is the embodied piece, the felt sense in your own being, noticing the sensations so that when you're crafting your morning routine or when you're having a conversation with a potential client or whatever it might be, you already know what it feels like in your body for it to feel really open and intuitive or it to feel really structured. And what about that you like or what about that you don't like?
Yeah, absolutely. I see that with creativity. I need constraints in order to be creative. And now
Yes.
creativity is very free flowing. It's very intuitive. But like if someone says, "Hey, go write a piece." Well, that's quite general. But
Yeah.
if they provide constraints, "Hey, go write a piece that includes the color yellow, a martini, and a cactus." Well, all of a sudden I have something to work with, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are constraints in place, structure. And I also noticed I am yoga teacher certified as well. And what I found interesting, which I'm sure you can also speak to, certain poses can open up emotions. And so teaching a yoga class, all of a sudden, I don't know, maybe it's a triangle pose and people are feeling this stretch in the left-hand side and they're really trying to hold the alignment, but then all of a sudden emotion starts to come through for some
Mm-hmm.
reason. From my understanding, we can store emotions in the body. So is that a piece of this too?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big piece of somatic work in general is how emotions, beliefs, thought patterns live in our bodies. When I talk about this, sometimes, I mean, your audience, I'm sure they're with us, but sometimes if I'm talking about this, I work with a lot of corporate clients and it can sound woo-woo, like it lives in our bodies, people, and here's how. And one of the easiest things that I think is really relatable and that you can feel yourself is like when you are talking to someone you just started dating, you've got a little crush and you have butterflies in your body or in your
Mm.
belly, right?
Yeah.
Or if you are about to give a presentation and your breath is short and you feel kind of buzzy.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about when I talk about somatic work and how your body feels emotions and it feels the belief of like, am I good enough for this? Do I deserve to be here? There's physical manifestations of that. So if we can go in there and start to give those sensations some room to be felt, to be heard, notice the parts that are connected to it, a scared part that just wants to be given some space or some compassion, maybe a really confident part that's like, set me free, please. I want to shine. When we get to know these parts, it becomes less about like, I've got the devil and angel on my shoulder, or I'm being pulled in two different directions, and more about just an integrated capital S self, an integrated self.
Yeah, absolutely. With clients all the time, sometimes I ask, like, what does your gut say? Like, what does your gut feel? Because our minds can make up all these stories. And I know before you talked about like intuition and how it's a big part of business. And that's my entire thing. Like, that is my belief for business owners is that yes, there are strategies for things and ways that people have operated where they found success. That doesn't mean that works for you too. And so bringing in the intuition piece to help guide people towards what works for them, what works for their business.
Yeah. Yeah. And the question of, well, what does your gut think about this? I think that's actually a pretty high level question. And I think that oftentimes it's not entirely clear. I struggled so much with anxiety growing up. And I was like, well, my gut says that I'm screwed. And like, I don't know if this is my
And
gut
you want
or
to run
this
away.
is, yeah, I don't know
Yeah.
if this is fear or if this is truth. And so being able to discern between the two is another really beautiful piece of somatic work too, so that you can notice it could be really subtle and nuanced, the difference between a true intuitive gut feeling and anxiety or fear
True.
or conditioning or someone else's beliefs. I'll ask people a great guiding question that I'll ask myself, that I have my clients, anyone can ask themselves, is when you're feeling overwhelmed by something, or you're feeling anxious, or you're feeling kind of out of tune with yourself, is whose is this?
Interesting. Because it
Yeah,
might not be
is this
theirs.
mine?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or is it a coach's? Is it my mom's? Is it a friend's? It's not always ours.
Yeah. That's a great question, a great prompt. I think also what I'm feeling into is that when I became a Reiki master at one point, I had an energy healing business. And intuition, I found for me, intuition looks a little different for everyone, but for me, it was a felt sense in the body. It was a
Hmm.
knowing. And then I began to see, oh, I would also kind of get messages, but they'd be in my voice in my head.
Yeah.
But there was a very nuanced difference between an intuitive message that came in that I could hear of like, do this thing, yes, no, whatever it is, and anxiety. And
Yeah.
determining the difference between the two was so difficult.
Hmm.
And still, I have to check myself to see, like, where is this coming from? And I find that when it comes in intuitively, it has like a resonance that's so much deeper than something coming in from anxiety.
Yeah. Yeah. There's like a potent trust to it. A trust from itself. Like that voice is trusting of itself
Yeah.
versus the fear voice is like a little bit more timid, I find, for myself and for my clients. And this is a big, big piece of my own journey, and how I got into somatic work was because I felt like I had anxiety, but I also all my life have had a pretty strong intuition. I've been very strong-willed most of my life, all my life. And so I felt like the waters got a little bit muddied. And how can I actually be better at discerning within my own body, rather than like, let me write a pros and cons list, or let me journal about this even, or let me like all of these intellectualized, like you said, ways of doing things that are so mind based. I find them to be kind of like a one and done thing. Whereas I think having the felt experience of what it's like to hear, not only hear, but act on your intuition versus hear and act on your fear, that is so much more sustainable and
Yeah.
so much more harmonizing for your mind and your body than something external. And so I think that that is like one of the best tools you can have in your toolkit, is to be able to feel in your own body, like going in there, high part of me that is here right now, that is scared, or even before that, hi, what part of me is here? And letting the fear part or the embarrassed part, the shame part, the confident part come through. That
Yeah.
is one of my favorite ways to open the dialogue. It's what's led me to the deepest self-trust that I've had. That was the missing piece when it came to all the intellectualizing to the embodiment. And so that to me feels like such a stronger, more empowering way to notice intuition versus fear, and like capital S self versus a scared part, than it is to just kind of write a list of some sort or like do an exercise.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's I was listening to this something recently that was saying like our heart is our greatest source of wisdom and our body has so much wisdom. We think the brain has it all, that the mind has it all. But when we can trust our body and see what's there, what it's telling us, it can be one of our best guides or compass
Mhm.
through life.
Yeah, I love this. And wisdom is actually my word of the year.
Oh,
Yeah, wisdom to me, wisdom and intellect are two values, but they're different. And I really like to talk about this because if you think of someone who is an intellectual, right? They're a professor, maybe is the archetype, versus someone wise, someone who's seen a lot, someone who's lived a lot. Those two things feel very different.
mhm.
So intellect is great, and that's a great thing to value. That's in my top probably 15. But wisdom to me is in my top 10. That means that I've had lived experiences and I've learned from them. More so, and this goes back to what we were saying, more so than I've read a textbook and I can tell you about the facts that I've learned. This is, no, I've had an experience, I've gone through it, and now I can speak from an embodied place about it. So
Mm.
yeah, wisdom is a top one of mine, having a lived and felt sense.
Yeah, I love that. I think we need more wise leaders in the world,
Yeah.
personally. But my word of the
Hmm.
year was patience. I was
Mm,
so bummed when it came in. I was like, patience? That's not fun. That's
I
not
don't wanna.
progress or like growth. Patience? Like what? But I'm learning that that in itself is a wise lesson and
Totally.
patience and practicing patience in many different areas of life.
Yeah, that's a good point. It feels to me like patient and wise are very connected. And when you said we need more wise leaders, I visualize someone who has like gray hair and they've seen some stuff and they're not as maybe like sparkly than we would envision, like a traditional girl boss to be, right? But it's someone who's lived through things and can speak from that place and has probably a groundedness to them and in the way that they're sharing. That to me, I trust that so much more. I trust that they're probably also pretty patient
Yeah.
because they've learned that that's the way versus someone who's rushing to get there or someone who's like so outward facing, trying to
Yes,
prove something.
absolutely. I want to shout that from the rooftops. When I think of a wise person, I think of this shaman that I met in Colorado, and he's 80
Mm,
something, and he had led ayahuasca retreats for decades. And just the way that he speaks and his presence, like he says very few words, but those words are powerful and
mhm.
they stick with you. And so coming across a wise person, it's I feel like that is the more common experience than someone who has this like fluorescent brand and is talking
Right.
miles a minute and like super high energy. At least
Yeah.
in the people who I define as wise that I've met.
Yeah. Something that I've noticed lately and been kind of keen on is who is the slowest person in the room. This is something that I notice a lot when I'm in teaching yoga and I see the students coming into the class. Who is the slowest person who comes in and who's the quickest person who comes in?
Yeah.
And then noticing how that plays out in their yoga practice.
I love that. Yeah. I think it's so interesting too that do you actively teach yoga now?
Hmm.
And then I actively lead Reiki and meditation classes once a month. It's just, it feels good to me. I feel like it keeps me connected to my intuition, but I find like the intention and how someone moves is
Hmm.
telling physically.
Yeah. Yeah, it is telling. And I could speak from my own experience. I come in hot. I need some of that wise crone patient energy. Like I bust in and bust out. And that's something that I need to work on. And it's been an intention of mine for a while. I actually think I've gotten a lot better at it. Um, and I feel that it totally, I took a yoga class last night for the first time in a while, and I start the class kind of rushing through things. I find myself rushing through. And of course, that's how I came in the door. That's probably how I've done most of my day today. But then the beautiful thing about yoga is it gives you kind of the time and space and access to your breath to notice this pattern and then to slow things down. And I'm probably going to leave the yoga studio slower than I came into it, which is a good
Yeah.
thing. But yeah, I think like for listeners too, that if you are feeling a little frenzied, a little frazzled is a word that I hear a lot when people first come to work with me. Do an experiment. See what it's like to be the slowest person walking into the yoga studio or the slowest person walking into the coffee shop.
Yes, yes, we're going slow-mo, turtle speed.
Especially in the
My
winter.
my husband and I, we call it snail magic of like going slow. We used to go on these walks and there'd be certain times of the year just all these snails everywhere. And I remember I kept pulling an oracle card that was the snail, and it was like there's so much magic that you can find when you go slow.
Yeah.
But of course, I think culture also has a lot to do with it, right? Like if you're
Yeah.
living in New York, it's hard to go slow. You're
Mhm.
surrounded by busyness. So do you find that people that affect too, kind of the outer affecting the inner, and like what do you recommend in terms of fortifying those boundaries a bit more?
Mm. Yeah, there's something to be said about cultivating your inner environment, right? But I like to speak to like reality. Like I don't need any of my clients or myself to be the Dalai Lama. Like let's also work with reality and living a full life that has environmental factors. And so you can manipulate your environment to support you. And again, with the repetition thing, like, I'm looking at my desk, I have a calm candle here that I love the scent of. And that really activates like a groundedness for me when I sit at my desk and I light the candle. I have flowers that make me feel really grounded and like connected to nature. I have things in my I have a picture in Joshua Tree of a retreat I led with a bunch of all of us naked on a rock. Like I have things that make me feel, okay, I'm connected to my passion and my purpose. I'm grounded. There's like a ceremonial aspect to it. And that really helps me cultivate my external environment. And also, your internal environment can be equally cultivated. I could have none of these things on my desk right now, but if I closed my eyes and I gave myself access to my own inner world, I could still bring up all these feelings of groundedness, of purpose, of pleasure, of ceremony. So I think oftentimes when we start out, we are quick to like change everything in the external environment when in reality, that's probably an avoidance tactic to doing the trickier stuff, which is how do I cultivate these feelings that I want to feel internally?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a phase where I felt like I was buying a new crystal every week because I was like, oh, I need one for this and one for that. And then eventually I was
Yeah.
like, I have a lot of crystals and I still have the same issues. So,
Well, it's also outsourcing your power.
yeah,
Like
exactly.
crystals are fun. I have all sorts of weird rocks and stuff that I've collected from nature, like on my desk, but whoa, yeah. But I am always going to choose the empowering option for
Mhm.
myself, for my clients, over the outsourcing of power option. And if you're putting all of your weight into a crystal and a full moon and a like human design thing, then I think that's giving a lot of your power away.
Yeah.
But it takes courage to have power. And so it takes courage to go in there and discover it and touch it, turn the dial up on it a little bit. But
Mhm.
it's way more sustainable, way more true.
Absolutely. And this touches on something that I was meditating this morning and thinking about, like, what's the one thing I want to make sure I ask Kelly?
Mhm.
And it's this narrative that I've heard, which is sometimes the thing that we're most afraid of is what we want. So we want success, but it turns out that we might actually be very afraid of being successful. Is that the case where courage, I assume courage plays a role, but I guess what do you think about that
Mm.
scenario?
Yeah, I think I'm really big on in my own life. And so obviously these are the clients that I attract to is living a life that feels turned on and pleasurable and purposeful and passionate and juicy and exciting and like dripping in honey and like being a mermaid in the ocean, that takes courage because it's messy.
Hmm.
It's messy when we decide to do that because it's not the norm. And I've been doing this for almost 10 years, and the judgment I've gotten when I'm at the beach at 2 p.m. on a Monday instead of behind my desk, or the looks I've gotten when I'm at a feminine embodiment retreat in Topanga for a weekend and we're all just kind of breathing and howling at the moon. Like, these things take courage, but if they're coming from a place of truth, it's a lot easier to keep walking the walk and keep down that path. But the problem I find is that we don't know, or clients who come to me initially don't know, is this truth? Is this a should? And so when you're able to touch truth and really go in there and kind of, I always think about it as like unweaving, unbraiding the beliefs and the emotions and the conditioning and the passed down crap that's muddied the waters. And then you get to that like pure thread in the middle that is you. It's so much easier to live courageously. It doesn't feel necessarily even courageous anymore. It just feels like you.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I'm feeling that. Also, do you have any retreats I would like to attend?
I've always got something in the works.
Amazing. Well, Kelley, I feel like that was such a powerful note to probably end on. Is there anything else you want to share with our listeners?
That was a fun place to end. But I want to hear what felt fun for them. So I like to have chats in the DMs on Instagram. I'm not an Instagram girly. That's not my main form of marketing or where I direct a lot of my attention to, but I do love it to connect. So if anyone came from this episode and that has a good nugget or anything else that they want to connect on, I love to hear that in Instagram messages.
Amazing. And then do you
Yeah.
have a main marketing channel?
My main marketing channel is speaking on podcasts, and I have my own podcast too about it's like a whole deep dive. It's a 7-day journey where you get to listen to real client sessions that I've recorded. And so that's just the pop-up on my website. If you go to my website or my Instagram, it'll take you to that pop-up where you can listen to real client episodes, real client sessions, and then you also get in your email ways to implement these teachings and practices into your own life over the course of a week.
Lovely. That's
Yeah.
great. I'm going to be listening later today.
Okay, good.
Well, Kelley, thank you so much for being on the show. Listeners, if you enjoyed this, you can find Kelley's Instagram and all her goodies below in the show notes. You can find me, Samantha Fackler, on Instagram, and my website, Grow with Sam, in the show notes. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a review and make sure you follow and subscribe wherever you're listening. Thank you. Thanks, Kelley.